The shocking flooding in southern Minnesota is easing. The cleanup still a reminder of how quickly it happened and how permanently lives have been changed. Around the country, it's more of the same, disasters of biblical proportions that keep coming more frequently.
Now, this is Talking Points on CBS News Minnesota.
Good evening and welcome to Talking Points. I'm Esme Murphy. You could think Minnesota might be getting off easy with climate change, but try bringing that up now to the folks in Waterville or Cook, Minnesota. Milder winters may be okay for some of us, but consider that the extreme weather events in the upper Midwest, the hailstorms, the droughts of recent years, and the floods this year are becoming more frequent. The scenes across the country are apocalyptic, and the experts you will hear from say you can expect it to all get worse. Tonight, what you need to know about climate change. You'll hear from our Director of Meteorology, Mike Augustyniak. You'll also hear from state leaders about what they are doing to help communities, and a word from Will Steger, the legendary polar explorer, who sees not just the negative, but hope in what is happening here in our region. But let's start with WCCO TV's Mike Augustyniak. Well, joining us right now, Mike Augustyniak. Mike, thank you so much for helping us out again on this issue.
Of course.
I think a lot of people are really scared and worried in the wake of what happened, around the state, but also what's happening around the country, this continued wave of billion-dollar disasters. What are you telling people?
Well, we're saying the same thing we've been saying for years, which is a lot of the extreme weather we're seeing is caused by the human influence on climate change, burning fossil fuels. And the quicker we stop doing that, the better chance we have to sort of at least hold the number of extreme weather events at the level that they're at now and eventually roll them back. But if we don't do something, it's going to continue, and it's going to continue to get worse.
Right. And you say one goal might be simply not to decrease it, but just to hold it. That would be something we could shoot for, because we're not shooting for that right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated political issue,
right,
more so than it is a complicated science issue. It's not a complicated science issue, and it seems like the way things are going in the world, that holding things steady might be maybe the first goal.
Wow, okay. I know that you've prepared some graphics to show us, how this is happening, how this change is happening. Let's talk about those.
All right, so if we look at the number of billion-dollar weather disasters that have hit the U.S. going back to 1980 and up through last year, and adjusting for inflation, obviously the cost of building materials in 1980 was a lot less than now, we have seen a giant jump in the average number of billion-dollar disasters, including last year over 25 of them. This year, we've already had almost a dozen of them, and this year is not even half over yet, so we are on track to see something similar, a similar finish coming up by the end of 2024. And then if we look specifically at the upper Midwest, this includes Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin, you can see here, first of all, when we have the most number of billion-dollar disasters, what I call danger season, which is late spring through the summer, and then also for each of those months, what caused each of those billion-dollar disasters. And for us around here, it's a lot of severe thunderstorm activity, and it's a lot of drought, crop losses. So then that begs the question, well, okay, which of these do we know are caused by climate change and the human component of it? The fact is that all of them are likely caused by climate change, but at the current day, state of the research, state of the science, there is a high correlation between climate change and heat waves. And there's still a likely correlation between heavy rainfall and the flip side of that, which is drought, and also wildfires. But there's more research ongoing in those areas.
You talk about these billion-dollar disasters. I think they are unpredictable. I know your job is to predict the weather, a week out, but is that one of the big problems, that you can't know exactly when and where these things are going to happen?
We still have a pretty good idea as to what causes the storms that cause these. But in terms of being able to say a month from now, Iowa is going to get hit by a big windstorm that's going to cost $1 billion. No, we can't do that. So what we need to do is prepare now for the outsized impacts that we know in general are coming.
Okay, and I know a lot of people are talking about nationally, the hurricane season. Are you expecting it to be a bad one too?
Yeah, we already had Beryl,
Yeah.
and Beryl was the first Category 4, the earliest Category 4 hurricane on record in the Atlantic Basin, and 90% of the water between Africa and the Caribbean, which is where our hurricanes come from for the Atlantic season, is at or above record temperature levels. And hurricanes are essentially heat engines, so the more heat, the more hurricanes and the more intense they can become.
You mentioned the political aspect of this. I've been around long enough to remember when literally our meteorologists would get hate mails.
That still happens.
but no, hate mails about this. They were actually dragged into boss's office and toned down the stuff on climate change because people are not with you. People are not believing it. Has that changed? Have your emails changed?
Well, first of all, there's nobody here that's telling us not to talk about
Right.
science and facts. The emails have changed. There's a noisy contingent, a small but noisy contingent that, frankly, we just ignore because their claims are not based in reality. And the vast majority, though, of emails we get are thank yous. Thank you for talking about this. Thank you for making the connection. There's a co-op between Yale University, a very liberal university, and George Mason University, somewhat conservative university. And for about the past 15 years, they've been doing research on climate change opinions in Americans' minds. And they have found a steady growth in how many people believe that climate change is happening. And right now, 72% of people in the U.S., regardless of political affiliation, believe that climate change is happening versus 15% that don't. So that's a 5-to-1 margin. And then when you look at the question, well, do you believe it's caused by human activity? The majority of people now believe that is the case as well, because it is.
Is the human activity part of this? Is it just human activity in the upper Midwest that is causing the problems in the upper Midwest? I mean, can we just do it by ourselves, or is it human activity in the U.S. that's causing it? I think you're going to say no there.
So that's where that's where politics comes in, and even more complicated global politics, because it does matter what other countries are doing on the other side of the globe as much as it matters what we're doing. But that doesn't mean that, if you have a big problem, everybody does what they can. And the fact is that richer countries can do more and can do more responsibly and equitably, and not leaving our people in industries that are having outsized impacts from climate change, not leaving them behind. That's not the goal here. We don't want to leave people behind, but we do need to all be pulling in the same direction.
All right, and so literally what's happening in neighboring states, or what neighboring states might be doing to try and alleviate climate change, that affects us and what's happening here in Minnesota.
It does. And so there's the mitigation piece of it, but then there's also the infrastructure planning piece of it. And so there are things that states individually can make bigger impacts on for their residents. But when it comes to the root cause of the problem, it's going to take all of humanity to pull together to get us there.
All right. Mike Augustyniak, once again, thank you so much.
Sure.
A big topic. In 2023, the Minnesota State Legislature approved $100 million in grants for communities to help mitigate the impact of climate change. Up next, 2 Minnesota state officials on what the state is doing and plans to do. Well, joining us right now is Kate Knuth. She is the climate director for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Thanks so much for coming on.
Happy to be here, Esme.
Okay. You are only the second person to hold this job. The position is only a few years old. Let me ask you, what, from your perspective, what should people think about what they saw in southern Minnesota and also in northern Minnesota too, with the flooding, the recent flooding?
Yeah, well, first of all, our hearts go out to the families and communities impacted by the floods. And I know many folks are still recovering from the impacts of these really significant rains that we've seen. From a climate change perspective, the biggest impact of climate change in Minnesota is that we are getting warmer and we are getting wetter. And when I say wetter, it means both more rain overall, as well as rain coming in bigger rain events, or like bigger storms. And so more water coming at once, so it strains our infrastructure and has big impacts on communities.
What is the state doing to try and help people? I mean, people are living where they live. They've lived there for years. Their families have lived there for years. What is the state doing?
we overall as a state, we have something called the Climate Action Framework, which which focuses on building resilience of communities and helping communities prepare for and adapt to the changes that are here and that are coming. And we also are working to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions or the pollution that causes climate change, because we need to do both of those things to create the kind of climate future that Minnesotans deserve to live in and want to live in. But really focusing in on that preparing communities for climate change, which I think is what we wanted to focus on more here.
Right.
We have one of our overall goals of the Climate Action Framework is to make significant climate resilience investments in communities in the next decade,
And
knowing
what does
that
that mean? What does that
what does
mean?
that mean? Yeah, so there's a couple different things. One is we want to make sure communities are planning for the climate realities that they're seeing now and that we know are to come. And so that means bigger storms happening more often. That can mean more extreme heat in the summer. It can mean more freeze and thaw cycles. So the roads might be getting messed up from getting more potholes because we're freezing and thawing more. So it's basically trying to help support communities and bring resources to communities to help them plan for a different climate future, and then implementing projects like upgrading infrastructure, like planting more trees in urban areas, like putting in things like more stormwater ponds to hold water in place and slow it down. Those are all things that we can do to build climate
One thing,
resilience, prepare for climate change.
one thing that's touchy is, and this has been sort of the case for years, but it's obviously accelerating, is that places that flood are going to
Yep.
flood again. I think you're
Yeah.
saying that. Are people going to have to move in Minnesota to different places or different neighborhoods because of this?
I think there are conversations nationally about where it makes sense for people to live or not. Those are really challenging policy conversations. And I think we need to be making smart decisions as a community to manage flood waters overall and to make sure we're not having impacts on each other by holding floodwaters up river in some cases or letting them go downriver too quickly. But Mankato, for example, has a significant flood wall that helps protect the city. And that's something that we have invested in as a state and as communities. We know up in the Red River of the North, flood mitigation measures have been taken for quite some time. Duluth has made significant investments in managing rainwater since we all remember the floods of 2012. And when the rain hit more recently in the Northeast and Duluth area, they were better prepared because of smart planning and smart investments in the infrastructure, the stormwater systems in particular that handle these bigger rain events.
So you see Duluth, and we remember those 2012
Yeah.
floods in that area. It was terrible. I mean, you see Duluth as an example of really thinking ahead and preparing in the way you'd like to see communities prepare.
I think we're seeing benefits of years of work in Duluth, and I think Duluth leaders would say that. I've seen media coverage saying that. So there's the handling the water from the big rains, and another example in Duluth is the wall along Lake Superior with stronger storms and making sure that that shore is built up and strong enough to handle stronger storms driven in
Okay.
part by climate change.
Well, Kate Knuth, thank you so much. You've got a very big job, and we wish you well in it because so many
Thank you.
people are looking at it and caring about it. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Appreciate it, Esme. Good to talk with you.
Well, joining us right now is Suzi Clark. She is an extension educator with the University of Minnesota, specializing in the area of climate and weather. Tell us about exactly what you do.
Hi, so yes, my name is Suzi Clark, and I am a climate resilience and adaptation extension educator with the University of Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership. That's a mouthful. We usually just say Climate Resilience Extension Educator, and we shorten that long name of our organization to MCAP. But
Okay.
we are focused on climate adaptation and educating Minnesotans about climate change and climate adaptation.
Right. I think a lot of people, after these latest floods here and hearing news of places around the country either having these terrible fires, hurricane season coming up, I think people are really worried and really scared. What do you tell people? What groups do you speak to?
So our goal is to reach Minnesotans regardless of what sector of life they are in or what sector of society they are in. So we communicate with people in a professional capacity. So people who want to learn about climate change in order to make better decisions in the long term. If you're, for example, a stormwater specialist and you want to make sure that your city can prepare for floods, you need to think about what floods will look like in 30 years. But we also work with people at the community level, people who are concerned about climate change and how it affects them personally, how it affects their communities, and how they can become stronger advocates for change in their communities.
I know the state also obviously works with farmers who are dramatically affected.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
in terms of when people, I think there are a lot of skeptics who have come around. We know that looking at this, what do you tell people about what to expect in the next 5 years, in the next 20 years, 40 years?
Yes, I think we've had a lot of people come around, so to speak, because the consequences of climate change have become undeniable. It used to be easy to say that it's only happening over there or it's only going to happen to my grandkids, but it's not. It's happening here in Minnesota and it's happening now. And there's kind of three trends that we observe in Minnesota. They're already happening and we expect them to continue. That Minnesota is getting warmer, wetter, and that we're going to have more extreme weather and more rapid transitions between those extremes. So this year is a perfect example. We had an incredibly dry winter, and now we're having a record-setting late spring into early summer in terms of how wet it is. And those transitions between really dry and really wet, we expect those to be faster and to happen more often in the future as the climate warms.
So expect more extremes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, listen, I want to thank you so much for joining us. That's really helpful information. We appreciate your insights and also your educational efforts.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Up next, explore Will Steger on the dangers, but also the hope that he sees for the future. Well, joining us right now is renowned polar explorer Will Steger, who has been talking about climate change for a long, long time, and he's kind enough to join us now. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
And you have a brand new documentary out that talks about one of the most famous explorations that you did back in the late 1980s. You could no longer do today because the ice isn't there anymore. Can you just tell us about that?
Yeah, that was crossing Antarctica, and actually all the major expeditions that I've done in the last 20 years, the routes aren't there anymore. They're not the same routes. Either the ice shelves are gone, sea ice is gone. So, it's been a major change. We first saw the changes in the polar regions, and now, of course, we're seeing them now all around the globe.
And you've got a new documentary out after Antarctica that addresses this very issue. Let me ask you, I think a lot of people are really, it's beginning to hit home for a lot of people for whom it didn't hit home, including people here in Minnesota with the flooding. Obviously, we're seeing, friends and relatives getting hit hard by all over the country by fires or hurricanes. When you look at what's going on, what are your thoughts?
Well, there's no shortage of climate catastrophes right now. The media is just filled with it. And what we're seeing, I mean, I think people are getting it. If they're not going to get it, they'll get it soon. And so I don't think that's an issue of people getting it. But I think the real issue is the fear that people have. They don't know how to deal with this. And it's like any other expeditions I've been on. When you're in a real dangerous situation, when you're in that type of a dangerous situation like we are with the climate, you don't focus just on the danger and on your fear and magnifying your fear. You look at the solutions or how are you going to innovate your way out of this situation. And I feel that the fear and just the craziness we see over climate right now is we can mourn these changes, but they're a reality. But we do have to move beyond that because there is still a future in this globe. There's a future for our younger people and so forth. And we've got to focus on what do we do from here? We have, if you want to look at some real positive things, 15 years ago, we were just working on policies for clean energy, solar and that, and there wasn't any employment, a little bit on wind. And now, it's multi-billion-dollar industry. Look at all electrical jobs, and there's so many jobs out there. They can't get enough people to work. And so it's definitely, solutions are in economical that way. But we have to focus more on, what we can do, maybe personally, but what can we do as a group and so forth. And
Well, I'm so glad you made that point actually about the businesses, because that is, I guess, a glimmer of hope that maybe most of us have not thought about. Are we doing enough from a governmental standpoint, a personal standpoint? Your thoughts about what's happening in Minnesota?
well, Minnesota is still a leader. I mean, if you look at our solar industry, the wind industry, it's one of the biggest employers. And so I feel we're doing well in Minnesota. And fortunately, you know, although it might get hot in the southern part of the state, Minnesota is set up pretty well for these changes that were going on. And Minnesota has a way of also taking action, which we have done because of proper leadership. I think we have some really good leadership in the state. It's not that way nationally. The national politics are, a little bit crazy. And although the last 4 years, there's been so much investment in clean energy, and that's paying off with jobs. But we still have to be involved politically, of course, but we have to be involved individually. I mean, first our habits and so forth, but it's who you associate yourself with, and the power that you have with might be your church or your friends and your politicals, whatever that might be. We do have as individuals, especially collective, when we start moving, and but we just have to focus more on the positive, and where we're at right now, it's just an overall crazy time now with politics and that, but it's you can't really focus in that kind of climate.
Yeah, it's interesting because you actually have some hopeful views or aspirations for us on what a lot of people vote, especially if you talk to younger people. The vision is pretty cataclysmic about what their future is going to look like in 50 years.
Well, it's going to be cataclysmic if we remain in this fear and this giving up stage. Of course, it's going to be that way. There's a great future ahead of us. It's going to change. I mean, we're not, it's the problem is for the half of the population of the globe that's going to starve and so forth. That's an issue. But giving up, and especially giving up when you're younger. I mean, how do you give up when you're 20? I don't know how. I mean, you can mourn it for a while, but you do have to take positive steps for action, and that's the only way out is to move forward and collectively. And yes, we are in a very challenging place right now.
All right. Well, Will Steger, thank you so much. And the new documentary After Antarctica is out. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, and thanks so much for having me. Thank you.
And that does it for this edition of Talking Points. As always, please email me with comments and suggestions at esme@wcco.com. The show streams every Wednesday and Thursday at 6:30 and 9:30 p.m. on CBS News Minnesota. You can find CBS News Minnesota on our website or on our WCCO smartphone app. On Friday, the show posts to YouTube for on-demand viewing. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Esme Murphy, WCCO News.